Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala hamma ba'd. So we are speaking to you, mashallah, with my dear friend and colleague Sami Hamdi. And yesterday we had a very emotional day visiting Srebrenica, interacting with and hearing live testimony from, subhanAllah, a number of people, the Imam who told us his story, the local leader, one of the leaders of the militias that was defending Srebrenica. And of course, we met the elderly grandmother who lost her husband and then her first son. And then she saw the very last days of the massacre. She saw her two sons, one of them being dragged away in the car, and she fainted on the spot. She lost her entire family. But subhanAllah, one of the sons, his wife was pregnant when he was killed, so she gave birth. And so alhamdulillah, one grandchild. But to hear from her and to see that stability and the strength that she has. And this year she told us she performed Hajj, mashallah, tabarakallah, 79 years old, she performed Hajj. So yesterday was just overwhelming for all of us. And today's quick topic is a topic that I think needs to be addressed. How do we make sense of this barbarity and evil theologically? In 2010, I was a part of the first delegation of American imams that was sent by the State Department to visit Auschwitz and Dachau. And I went for personal reasons. I spoke about that. So I visited Auschwitz and Dachau. I visited the Nazi concentration camps. And because we were State Department, it was a very high-level delegation. It was 2010. They managed to get the last batch of survivors. Now there's no survivors left. But in 2010, we visited, or they brought them, and we interacted with, and we saw, 3 survivors. In Auschwitz, we met one of the people that was at Auschwitz. And I'll never forget, to the day I die, I'll never forget. And there's a picture in the New York Times about this, that he gave us his story, and he, made his uplifted his, hand, his sleeve, and we saw the tattoo that the Nazis had placed on him, right? And yesterday, exactly, that was deja vu when the Bosnian leaders showed his, sniper, and and he told us the stitches and everything. Like literally, these are memories, right? So there was time for Q&A. I raised my hand, first question, and I asked him, how did you, as a person of faith, deal with this evil? Because the story is just haunting. Auschwitz was evil, there's no question about it. Srebrenica is evil, there's no question about it. The inhumanity of just killing. I mean, we can't even imagine. And so I asked this person, how did you, as a believing person in God, deal with this? And the answer shocked me to silence, because he's coming from a different rabbi. In anger, like there's genuine anger. His hand waved, he goes, no, there is no God. There cannot be a God. God would not have allowed this to happen. I stopped believing in God in Auschwitz. I thought he'd give some deep, profound. The evil was so profound for him, he stopped believing in God. And to see an elderly grandmother say, I never stopped praying for 79 years. To see a grandmother say, this year I did Ramadan, this year I did Hajj. Shattana ma baynahuma. Look at the difference between this and that, right? Look at the difference between the two paradigms here. Here in Bosnia, Islam is reviving after that massacre. You meet those survivors, you meet them, subhanAllah, there's a different sense taking place here, right? But still, as Muslims, we have to ask ourselves, how do we deal with the reality of evil? And this is a question that I'm not the only one asking it. When Allah announced the creation of Banu Adam, when Allah announced the creation of Adam, what was the one question the angels asked Allah? And the angels are not us. They're not responsible for us. They're not living amongst us. They're not the ones maintaining us. But still, when Allah told the specifications of Adam and the children of Adam, the angels are better than us. They're smarter than us, more intelligent than us. They have more iman than us, far more iman than us. The angels figured out instantaneously the reality of what's going to happen when you have people called Homo sapiens, Banu Adam. قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك. Even the angels couldn't grasp, because no other beast or animal goes to civil war for no reason. If there's a legitimate reason, they're fighting over something, okay, they're going to do it one time, and no species kills each other because of a difference in background, a difference in skin color. Animals don't go to civil war. When we say we're acting like animals, no, wallahi, worse than animals. What we see in Srebrenica, what we see in all of these genocides in Gaza and whatnot, worse than animals. No species in the creation does what Banu Adam does. Even the angels were like, how do we deal with this? Ya Allah, why would you do this? We've never, the evil that's going to come, it's unprecedented. Even the angels pointed this out, and they could not understand the wisdom. So don't feel guilty if you and I are struggling, because even the angels are struggling. And the answer that Allah gave, it is actually obviously so profound, it's so deep, because Allah did not attempt to rationalize. Allah did not attempt to look, well, actually, if you think about 1, 2, 3, 4, no. What did Allah say? قَالَ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. You're just going to have to trust me on this one. This is above your pay grade. You will not understand. He told a species better than us, smarter than us, more intelligent, more iman. He told them, this is beyond your pay grade. Well, then what do you think, me and you? How are we going to come to terms with this reality? It's not going to happen. We're not going to fully rationalize evil. Wallahi, it's difficult for me to comprehend. When you think about it, you're just like, how is it even possible? She invited the Croatian, the Serbian neighbors to her son's wedding. That same person tried to kill her. Like, unbelievable. This is not some stranger. The same person she invited to her son's wedding a year or two ago. And then when the civil war started, was like, just unfathomable. How is this possible? And all we can say, we begin to answer this question first and foremost with faith. Like, we're never going to fully rationalize, but that doesn't mean there's no answer. The answer, though, has to come from within faith. Because when you try to fully become intellectual, rational, no, you're going to fail. When you begin with the paradigm of taslim, of Allah knows best, and let me see if I can rationalize, then you find some wisdoms. And of these wisdoms, one of the biggest differences between us and all other peoples is our belief in the akhirah. If we didn't believe in the akhirah, if there was no akhirah, honestly, nothing would ever make sense. But when you understand that no matter what happens in this dunya, it's just a fraction of a millisecond. No matter how painful it is, no matter the children starving, no matter the pain that is suffered, it is literally the twinkling of an eye. And afterwards, there is an eternity of eternities. There is khulud, there is la maut, there is forever and ever and ever. Then no matter how painful a millisecond is, if that pain will generate an eternity of bliss, this is something our mind cannot comprehend. We cannot even, but it gives us some consolation. And of the wisdoms that we can extract as well is that for those that pass through tragedies, for those that live through them, without a doubt, it is a mechanism of raising their ranks. رفع الدرجات. It is a mechanism of cleansing their sins. It is a mechanism of fortifying their iman. People go through tragedies and they come out, if they have iman, bigger, better, and stronger. They come out with more courage, more fortitude, more wisdom. They live better lives, even though it was painful. But the quality of their iman changes exponentially. And that happens because of a tragedy. And by the way, all of us know this. We are closest to Allah in times of tragedy. We're closest to Allah when life is difficult. This is a reality. So there's a wisdom that we can sense in this as well. And when we understand the purpose of creation is the worship and the connection with Allah, well then, if a little bit of pain brings about closeness to Allah, as Ibn Qayyim says, that never ever think that a musibah that brings you closer to Allah is actually a musibah. Rather, it is a blessing in disguise. How can it be a musibah if it brings you closer to Allah? Any musibah that brings you closer to Allah cannot possibly be a musibah. It is actually a gift to you because there's nothing more precious than being close to Allah. And of the wisdoms that there is evil and pain. And of course, this is a very long topic, and I've spoken about this. And every philosopher, every theologian has so many, lectures and talks, because this is one of the core questions of suffering, right? How do you explain human suffering? How do you explain evil? It's a core question of theology. I've spoken about this in other lectures, but of the wisdoms of why there is evil in this earth is actually not because of the evil itself. Allah does not love evil. No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Wallahu la yuhibbul fasad. Allah doesn't love fasad. وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. He's not happy to see kufr. No, Allah doesn't love evil. But it is because of evil that good needs to be resurrected and good needs to be fortified. And you need good to fight evil. And Allah loves the good. So when evil exists, it's not because Allah loves evil. Allah wants to bring out the good from the good people. And Allah wants to see that good flourish so that that good can be rewarded. So the evil is not in and of itself the desire. The desire is the outcome, which is what are you going to do to stop that evil? What are you going to do to combat that evil? What are you going to do to make sure it doesn't become worse? Simple example we all understand. One of the greatest deeds is to feed the hungry. How would you feed the hungry if there are no hungry to feed? One of the greatest deeds is a sponsorship of the orphan. How would you sponsor an orphan when there are no orphans to sponsor? It's not that hunger is desired. It is that generosity is going to be rewarded. You can't be generous if there's nothing to be generous to. So rather than, like this other person we met in Auschwitz, rather than say, why would God do this? What is the wisdom? We flip the script. What does Allah want me to do to stop this? What can I do to prevent this? And if I'm suffering myself, well then, like Ayyub, like others, is a test of my faith, and I will try my best to overcome it. If not, then I will meet with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the attitude of the mu'min. The mu'min is not like the other people in this regard. We don't expect Jannah on earth. Allah didn't create us for Jannah, for this world. He created us for the next. So once we understand this world is temporary and everything that happens is simply a test and a trial, even though we don't fully understand, at least there's some comfort. Here's the point, brothers and sisters. No matter what happens to you, the future is brighter for you. If not the future of this world, we hope the future of this world. If not the future of this world, without a doubt, the future of the akhirah. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. We have optimism, even when the dunya gives us no optimism. Even when we see the angel of death, we have optimism, because after death, there is ultimate life. This is what Iman does. It literally is a paradigm shift. You view the world differently. You can't possibly be like this other person with the perception of the world is this world. I live, I die, and that's it. If I don't get this world properly, there cannot be a God. But once you link the akhirah, yawm al-qiyamah, yawm al-hisab, once you realize no matter what happens in this dunya to those criminals, it is Allah who will deal with those criminals. Then you're not waiting for the UN to intervene. You're not waiting for a judgment from the ICC, from the criminal courts, from The Hague. What can The Hague do to Milosevic? Give him a life sentence? What will a life sentence do for the killing of tens of thousands of people? What, sitting in jail comfortably, air conditioned, getting his... that's punishment for what he has done? Well, imagine if we caught Netanyahu, suppose, and we were to give him a war crime, a criminal. So what? He gets 50 years, 100 years in jail after all that he's done? It doesn't work that way. This dunya cannot give you justice. There is no ultimate justice in this dunya. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally links justice to qiyamah, because there's no justice in this world. أَفَنَجْعَلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ كَالْمُجْرِمِينَ مَا لَكُمْ كَيْفَ تَحْكُمُونَ. Do you think the Muslim and the Mujrim are just going to live and die and that's it? No, there must be a day of judgment. There must be an end day. Allah literally says, do you think the Mujrim and the righteous person, أَمْ نَجْعَلُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ كَالْمُفْسِدِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ أَمْ نَجْعَلُ الْمُتَّقِينَ كَالْفُجَّارِ? You think the muttaqin and the fujjar are just going to have the same end result? They live, they die, and that's it? No, it's not possible. Allah uses justice as an evidence for qiyamah. Think about that. I should say Allah uses lack of justice. Lack of justice. There's no justice in this dunya. So Allah says, you think that's fair? No, it is not fair, which is why there must be a qiyamah. So when we see what is happening, when we hear these stories, our iman needs to be refined, purified, strengthened. We turn to Allah. We understand that there is a wisdom, even if we don't understand the wisdom. This is what Allah requires of us. He's not asking us to know the wisdom, but He is requiring us to accept Allah is the Rabb, and this is His creation, and what happens in His creation, He is in charge, but there is ultimate justice, and there is qiyamah, and the good will be rewarded, and the evil will be punished. When you have that iman, it is a paradigm shift. And you realize then every calamity and tragedy, it is not meant to punish. It is meant to sift, to test, and to raise. The mu'min does not believe that what happens to him happens because of a negative. No. With this, I want to finish off. The Prophet said, "Ajaban li amril mu'min." Amazing are the affairs of the believer. Everything that happens to the believer happens for his good. Whether it is a positive, whether it is a negative, it is for his good. This is our attitude. Whatever happens to us, قُلْ لَنْ يُصِيبَنَا إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَنَا هُوَ مَوْلَانَا. Nothing's going to happen to us except if Allah has decreed, and Allah is our Mawla, our protector. Allah will take care of me. If not in this dunya, for sure in the akhirah. Meaning, if not in this, if I die in this dunya because of what's happening, in the akhirah, Allah is going to give me everything which will make the pain of this dunya worthwhile. So Muslims realize this is what Iman does, and we see the impact of Iman in the people of Bosnia. We see the reality of Iman. Those that have gone through and lived through those tragedies, subhanallah, just phenomenal. And other peoples of other faiths, you can't expect them to have that because they don't have that deep level of Iman. And with this, I want to hand it over to Sami and wanted him to talk. We're talking about the history of Bosnia. If you can just begin quickly with the peace accords and Clinton's involvement, and then inshallah, if you have a few minutes, inshallah.
First of all, Jazakumullah khair for being here. Thank you, Sheikh Yasser, for the invitation. One of the things that is worth noting when it comes to the Dayton Accords, and indeed the whole war, is to understand the underlying dynamics. The Americans had a special dilemma here in Bosnia. The dilemma was that if they let the Serbs win, it's most likely to be pro-Russia, whatever entity they form. But if they let the Muslims win, then it would be a Muslim majority democracy in the heart of Europe. And the Americans found that under the Bush administration, the State Department was more sympathetic to the Serbs because they had been posted there in the 1960s and 1970s during Yugoslavia. And under the Clinton administration, they met with resistance from the Europeans because the British Foreign Secretary had told Clinton in 1993 that although the Muslims are being killed in Bosnia, this is, quote, a painful but necessary for the reconstruction of Christian Europe. In 1993, Clinton had a phone call with Mitterrand after he won the elections in 1992. And Clinton asked Mitterrand and said to him that the UN arms embargo that's been imposed on Bosnia is not affecting the Serbs or the Croats. The Serbs are getting weapons from the former Yugoslav army and from Russia. The Croats are getting weapons from the Europeans. The Muslims are the only ones who are disadvantaged. So what do you think? Because Joe Biden at the time and Clinton were advocating for lifting the UN arms embargo, that the UN arms embargo, we lift it and at least we restore the sort of balance. Mitterrand publicly came out and said that we don't want a regional conflict, used the exact same words as a butcher that we know quite well from the former administration. But privately, he told Clinton, and this is in the Anthony Taylor tapes, you can find it, it's a whole list of documents like WikiLeaks, you can find it online. Mitterrand said to Clinton that a Muslim majority state in the heart of Europe is an unnatural phenomenon, that's his exact words, and Bosnia does not belong, and if it is the Muslims who are disadvantaged, we would prefer to lock in this disadvantage. And so Srebrenica is not the first mass genocide. It's the only one that's well known because by the time Srebrenica happened, there was a critical mass of public opinion. People were starting to see what was happening. Public opinion had reached critical mass where Tucker Carlson, Amiga, that this was now really starting to talk about what was happening in a way in which it could no longer be ignored. Because genocide was also committed in Prijedor in 1993. Genocide was also committed in other areas near Mostar. The reason Srebrenica got so much highlight and the reason Srebrenica actually took place is because the lack of reaction from the United Nations to what Israel was doing here in Bosnia meant that by the time that he entered Srebrenica, he felt that he could go in and do it publicly. You guys went to Srebrenica yesterday. You saw that video where they're about to kill the Bosnian and you say, wait, I need to recharge the battery first.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, yeah. So the footage is them recording it. They didn't record the previous massacres because they were worried what the international community would do. But then after the first one, they entered Kanyus, when they entered, Pale, when they entered, Bielina and these other places as well, they realized that at the end of the day, Biden, the international communities, others, were not really going to do anything and in fact lean more towards them. I'll give you an example. You guys are in Hotel Hills, you guys landed in Croatia, but there's a mountain right next to you over there behind you. It's called Igman Mountain. The Serbian army, the Chetnik army, they call that mountain Allah's Road. The reason they called it Allah's Road is it was the only exit point of Sarajevo to get aid. You guys went to the Tunnel of Hope, right?
Yes.
The Tunnel of Hope goes underneath The reason they couldn't go overland was because the snipers from the hills around here kept shooting. You're in an area where Bosnians could not go through. You are staying in a hotel on the backs of those mujahideen who protected it so that you can have a nice five-star experience here in the hotels. They could not walk across this area during the war because they would be sniped, which is why they built a tunnel that goes underneath. The tunnel just over here. It goes underneath. It goes for about 800, 900 meters, and it comes under Igman Mountain. In 1993, Mladic comes up Igman Mountain, and the Muslims are bickering between themselves over who should be leader, and he's about to take the mountain. And he gives an interview. He says to Serbian television, I have taken control of Allah's road. Izetbegovic panics. So Izetbegovic decides to call Robert Owen. He says to him, listen, if you get Mladic to stop, I'll agree to your plan. Now, the plan that Robert Owen had was that he wanted to split Sarajevo into two, give half to the Serbs, half to the Muslims, and then leave the Muslims in a small rump area. The northern part will go to Serbia, the western part will go to the Croats, and the Muslims will be left landlocked in the middle of all of them. Izetbegovic said, the president, Allah Yarahmah, the philosopher king, I believe him to be the mujaddid of the last 100 years. His book, Inescapable Questions, is the most... I read that at 18. Him and Muhammad Asad are the greatest influences on my own political thought today, two European Muslims. Izetbegovic writes, he calls Robert Owen and says, I'm ready to agree to your plan if you get Mladic to stop. Robert Owen says, sorry, I can't get him to stop. So Izetbegovic says, okay, then I'm not agreeing to your plan. Now, at that time, Robert Owen wanted a peace plan. So Izetbegovic said to Clinton, said, this Riviera, this plan that you want to implement in Sarajevo, I'm willing to agree that we have to get him to stop. And so they went and forced a ceasefire with Mladic on the mountain in order to begin discussions. The 5th Muslim unit was stationed here by the Tunnel of Hope. They went into the tunnel. There's a video. You might have met the Imam in Tunnel. He doesn't come often. But there's a video of him where they're all saying to Izetbegovic, don't worry, we will look after the mountain. They go under the tunnel. Allahu Akbar.
Yeah, we met him.
Yeah. They go underneath the tunnel. They come up the mountain. 6 months they start fighting. Izetbegovic is in Geneva. Back and forth. Should they disarm, the Bosnian fight and etc. All this stuff, whatnot. And then 6 months later, he gets a phone call. Mr. President, we've driven them off the mountain. And Izetbegovic says, guys, I need to take this draft back to Sarajevo for the parliament to. When they go back, Mladic is never able to come up the mountain again. And there's a wooden masjid built on Igman that the soldiers built after this encounter. And when they finished building it, they built the minaret and they said, this is Allah's road, Allah's mountain, and Allah will never lose this mountain. That mountain was never taken throughout this entire war. The point being is that during those negotiations, the pressure was not necessarily on the Serbs. The pressure was always on the Muslims in order to agree. The reason Dayton came about was not because the Americans had a change of heart. It was for 2 reasons. The first is, you guys are going to Travnik today. Travnik, when you go, you'll see a massive mountain next to the fortress on the hill where you guys are going to visit. You'll recognize it when you go and see it. That mountain is called Vlasic. Vlasic was described by Karasic, the Bosnian Serb leader, as the Cape of Greater Serbia. On top of that mountain was a command center communications to navigate the different units that were moving Serbia. At the end of 94, a commander called Muhammad Alajic goes to the president and tells him, Mr. President, I think I can take Vlasic mountain. The reason Vlasic is so important, that mountain that you're going to see, when you get to the top, you can literally go all the way to Banja Luka, which is the capital of the Bosnian Serbs. If you take that mountain, it changes the whole military dynamics. At the end of 94, Muhammad Alajic goes to the president and tells him, Mr. President, I can take the mountain. The president goes, are you mad? What do you mean you can take the mountain? He said, Mr. President, think about it. Around February, March time, the snow is 2 meters thick. If I take my soldiers and tie the ropes, between each one, just in case one of them falls, they can pull them out. If we go on a day where there's a snowstorm, we can actually take them by surprise and take the mountain. So Izetbegovic is like, whatever, the Americans hear about it, but they're like, it's ridiculous. And Muhammad Alajic, at the end of February, beginning of March, goes in a Tom Cruise-esque fashion up that mountain. He takes the mountain within a week. When he takes the mountain, Tudjman, the president of Croatia, calls Clinton. Tudjman, 1 month earlier, had given an interview where he said, the Americans are relying on me to prevent the emergence of an Islamic State in Bosnia. Public interview to the media. He called Clinton and told him, listen, you need to act quickly. They've turned the tide of battle. They've taken this mountain and they started rapidly taking the ethnically cleansed areas, which is why Mladic, when they were going on the west side, Mladic came in on the east side because he realized the tables are turning. Let's make another bid for Sarajevo. Let's take Srebrenica, go through Goražde, Žepa, and take Sarajevo. When Srebrenica happened, there are 2 narrations. One is that the Americans were angry at Srebrenica. The other is that Jacques Chirac was furious that Mladic had humiliated French soldiers. And so Jacques Chirac had told Clinton, I'm going in whether you like it or not. And Clinton said, okay, let's do it under the American banner. And so they entered. So when they got to Dayton, the Muslims at this point, they're retaking Sansky Mosque, they're retaking Priado, they're retaking all of these ethnically cleansed areas one by one. And they get to within 10 or 20 kilometers of Banja Luka, the capital of the Bosnian Serbs. And then Holbrooke, the US ambassador, calls Izetbegovic and tells him, Mr. President, we're bombing some Serbian positions, but if you take another step further, we will bomb you as well. Izetbegovic says, what do you mean? You left us for 3 years, 4 years, genocide. He goes, Mr. President, I'm sorry, I can't let you retake all those areas. The Serbs are now willing to talk. We need to stop the fighting now. Otherwise, we're going to bomb you. Izetbegovic is dragged to Dayton, Ohio. The Croats at this point are still attacking Mostar. Did you guys go to Mostar? Mostar looked like Gaza during the war. I know you guys walk through it and you look there and you think, okay, it's all been rebuilt. Mostar, what happened there was nasty. They blew up the masajid and the like because the Croats in 93 with the Serbs made an agreement. They said, okay, Croats and Serbs, we don't like each other, but we hate the Muslims more. So let's just attack them and then split the land between us. And Mostar was supposed to be the jewel of which they took. Does anyone know where the front line was in Mostar? Don't say the river. The Muslims never let them get to the river. And that's why they bombed the bridge to try to isolate some of the Muslim units so they could at least take half because they could not take the full city. That bridge had 99 steps when it was built by the Ottomans. When the UN offered to reconstruct it, they said, we don't want 99 steps. We don't want this 99 names of Allah stuff. So now it has 94 steps. If you walk and counted the steps, you would have seen it. There used to be a mihrab where they used to put the adhan as well. They said that mihrab doesn't get built either with the UN. The UN, symbolism matters for the UN in this regard. I know for us it's a bit, but for them it really matters. Cultures, arts, museums, memorials, it matters for them. Srebrenica, the biggest funders of the memorial in Srebrenica are the Americans, which is why on the front door you don't see وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا, which is why the Srebrenica memorial took 6 months before they issued any statement on Gaza. And when the Bosnians went and complained, he said to them bluntly, listen, don't talk about Ummah. Ummah flies over us to Turkey. They don't fly to us. When Dayton came, Holbrooke said to Izetbegovic, you've got two choices. Either we give you a small piece of land where you will let 60% of the population today in Bosnia live on 25% of the land. A bit like West Bank and Gaza right now. They live on 25% of the land. Croatia took all of the coastline. And Holbrooke said to them, listen, if you want to have all of the Bosnia territorial integrity, then you're going to have to share on parity. So 7% Croats have the same power as 55% Muslims. And 20% Serbs have the same power as 55% Bosnians. And he created 3 presidencies. Then, in order to get the Serbs to agree, the Americans said, okay, we don't want Serbs to win, we don't want Muslims to win. So all of the ethnically cleansed areas will create a semi-autonomous republic called Republika Srpska. If you open Ayatollah Google on your phones and you put Republika Srpska, it will highlight those areas. You'll see just how big those ethnically cleansed areas actually are. They have power over economy, they have power, they have everything except security, and every year Dodik, who is the president of this Republika Srpska, always announces the creation of a police force, and the Americans have to come in and say that's against the agreement. Every year he tries to set up checkpoints on the border of Republika Srpska, and the Americans come in and say, no, we don't want these checkpoints put over here. The Americans essentially rewarded the ethnic cleansing in order to prevent the Muslim majority democracy. Just so you're aware, when Slovenia got its independence, they were immediately recognized, supported, 10-day war, and the Serbs were forced to recognize Slovenia. When Croatia seceded, 2-month war, the Americans, Europeans gave them every support, the Serbs backed off. The only hesitation, even though these are white Europeans, the only hesitation was the Muslims here in Bosnia. What do you do with them? And that's still the case over here. You guys went to Srebrenica, and there are some, I assume, youngsters amongst you, like under 18s. Until 2006, under 18 Bosnians were not allowed to visit Srebrenica. Because what happened was the education system was designed to rewrite the story that the Americans saved Bosnia after Srebrenica. And once they go through that social engineering, then they can go to Srebrenica and interpret it through those lenses. Mahathir of Malaysia got so upset about it in 2004 that he introduced all expense-paid scholarships for Bosnians to go to Malaysia in order for them to write their own stories. By the way, here, Izetbegovic went to America in 91, before the war started, and he met with a group of Bosnian Croats. And whenever he mentioned Bosnian or the Bosnian language, the Croats would heckle him and tell him there's no such thing as Bosnia. You're Croats of the Islamic faith. And the Serbs would say there's no such thing as Bosnia. So what happened was that when Izetbegovic went, what the Croats said that there's no Bosnians. You know, a people without a land, without a people, for a people without a land. You know, there's no land to give those Bosnians themselves. And so when Dayton was finally signed, Izetbegovic, in his book, Inescapable Questions, writes in the end, to this day, I do not know which is better, a just war or an unjust peace. And that's what you have in Bosnia today. Dayton was signed. They appointed a high commissioner on the top. Today it's someone called Christine Schmidt. This high commissioner has the power to overrule any law or any of the presidents. In the last election, he did something very controversial. On the day of the election, after everybody voted, he introduced a law increasing the representation of the Croats in the parliament, giving them extra seats in the parliament in order to try to convince the Croats in those areas not to. Stod, you guys were in Mostar. Stolic's 20 minutes outside of Mostar. In those schools in Stolic, it's a small town. Croats go to school in the morning, Bosniaks go to school in the afternoon because the Croats refuse to go to school with the Bosniaks. And the Dayton Agreement was signed by the Serbs and the Croats on the basis that this is a temporary stopgap. Bosnians here love to say every 100 years there's a war here. And if you go to Mostar in those areas, you'll find everybody is quite, we're not going to be taken by surprise again. Because the UN, they told that Bosnians hand over your weapons. The Muslims were the only ones who handed over their weapons because they believed him. But there's a couple of things before I wrap up I want to mention with regards to interpreting these events. The first is Alija Izetbegovic. If you haven't read his books, I highly recommend it. That guy, mashallah, may Allah have mercy on that warrior. There's a famous story about here in Ghazi Huzur Bey. He said that he attended Jumu'ah. Why he was able to win the respect despite being an elderly man, and he had to be in the tunnel, he had to be carried through that. They said one day he entered Jumu'ah in the Ghazi Huzur Bey and some of the soldiers were praying. So they've listened to the khutbah and there's a commotion in behind and he enters. People look behind, they see the president and he says, Salamu alaikum. And one Bosnian 18-year-old went, shh. And he sits down. Afterwards, he apologized to everybody. Yes, of course, I shouldn't have stayed during the khutbah. Anyway, Alija Izetbegovic, he was asked in 1993 by a European reporter, Mr. President, Croatia is fighting for a Croat state exclusively for Croats. Serbia is fighting for a Serbian state exclusively for Serbs. But you keep saying that you're fighting for a Bosnia where everybody can live together. Mr. President, how do you preserve these European values amidst these fires that are around you? And Izetbegovic says, first of all, I do want to clarify, these aren't European values that I'm espousing. This tolerance that I talk about comes from a Muslim faith. European values is Holocaust, 2 world wars, Warsaw pogrom, anti-Semitism, and the like. But under Islam, we created Andalusia. Sarajevo was the Jerusalem of Europe because my Allah commands me so, and it is my faith that makes me believe that we can all live together, which is why Izetbegovic was the only one of the 3 presidents, Milosevic, Tudjman, and Izetbegovic, who would ask the Croats to move back to Bosnia, who would ask the Serbs to move back to Bosnia. He would say, and there was a famous incident where Muslims refused to follow a Serb who was fighting in the Bosnian army against the Chetniks. And he says to Izetbegovic, Mr. President, I don't think the soldiers will follow me because I'm a Serb. So Izetbegovic goes to the unit and tells them, who are our teachers? They're or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he starts lambasting his own soldiers at the risk of muting, telling them, we're not fighting for what they're fighting. They're not our teachers. We are better than that. And when I went to Srebrenica last year, we had 2 groups back to back. And I confess, and I say it monthly, I hate going to Srebrenica. I hate it because of I mean, when you guys stood there, that was where all the shelling and stuff was happening. You know, when you went through the memorial, that's the hall where those thousands of refugees, can you imagine them sitting in panic? You can barely hear anything when you go through. You have to sort of vividly imagine. So last year, I had a friend of mine, Almir. We took Hiyas Fahmi, he came with us there. And I'm watching the group go around the different tombstones and I'm chilling by where the minbar is. And I'm looking at Almir and I told him, Almir, I hate coming here. And he said to me, brother, I used to think like you. He goes, but now when I come here, I feel jealous. Can you twisted individual? How on earth can you feel jealous coming to Srebrenica? He said, brother, I see you in America when you're telling them about Harris and Trump. You are telling them about Yusuf alayhi salam because he came out Al-Aziz. You are telling them about Nuh alayhi salam because he was Sayyid. You tell them about Musa alayhi salam because he was Sayyid. You tell them about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam because he entered Mecca. But you don't mention Ashab al-Ukhdud. You never mention them, even though Allah elevated them. He goes, you've forgotten completely about them. These are Ashab al-Ukhdud who are gathered and told, because you believe in La ilaha illallah. Think about it. The Bosnians, all they had to do was give up La ilaha illallah Rasulullah. That's all they had to do. And they would have been absorbed, by the neighboring populations and whatever, and none of this stuff would have happened. That's all they had to do. All they had to do was give it up. So why did they not give it up? Even the ones who you see are secular and the like, why did they not give up La ilaha illallah Rasulullah if that was the reason they'd be killed? Why is it, you know, when you saw in Srebrenica, they lined up 1,000 Bosnians and they shot them in the back. And then they said, is anyone still alive? And one of them said, I'm still alive. The Muslim narration, the Muslim Bosnian narration, because remember, it's heavily funded by the Americans in Muammar. The Muslim narration is that he actually said to them, I'm still alive, send me to Jannah with my brothers. That's the narration that's actually told. They chose to, he said, my brother, I feel jealous because when they face the ultimate test that we haven't faced, they passed with flying colors. He goes, my brother, I come here, I smell Jannah. He goes, we are the ones who should be pitied because if we were in the same situation, we don't even know who would do the same thing because we struggle even with boycott, let alone standing up for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that kind of thing. You see people go, oh, it's the only thing available, so I'll buy it. Yeah. But the other point I want to say to you is this. We were coming down Mount Pren, Konitz. I don't know if you guys will do the rafting on this trip. If you haven't, it looks really beautiful on this trip. But in any case, we were coming down Pren Mountain, and there is this Bosnian driver, tall guy, played basketball. I'm learning basketball now because the Americans seem to love it so much. And this New Yorker guy sitting next to him says to him, brother, I want to ask you a question, but please don't be offended. He said, sure. He said, now I've been here in Bosnia. I've seen, 250 years. They're trying to erase your identity. 95% of PAF was shut down to shut down your identity. They executed your leaders. Then they committed genocide. International community supported them. They were complicit, just like in Gaza. The Ummah was just making dua. I don't mean to be rude or anything, but how are you still Muslim? And I'll never forget it. Bosnian the guy stops the car and he steps out. He says, come, my friends. He says to him, you see those hills over there? He says, yeah. He goes, when I was a kid, I'd hear every night, we're coming to kill you, we're going to erase you, there'll be no Islam here. Karadzic in 91 said to Izetbegovic in the parliament building over here, he said to Izetbegovic, when we're done with you, the Muslims will be seat from Bobo. And then everybody's gone quiet. Everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And then Aldin does this. You hear him today. He said, because my brother, what we learned here in Bosnia is, the international community can abandon you fine. The Ummah, they just make dua for you like they're doing in Gaza, like not doing enough for Gaza. But what we found here in Bosnia is that as long as you never abandon Allah, Allah will never abandon you, which is why Mladic is in the Hague and we're here. Which is why the genocide is a Bonn and we're here. Which is why Austro-Hungarians came and went and we're here. Which is why those who came, all these empires, they came to the Islamic kingdom, communism and the like, they went and we're here. And that's the whole point of Bosnia. In that objectively, it should not have survived. It should have disappeared like Andalusia. Objectively, aside from Pakistan here and Iran, we used to try to get some arms here, there, and they're like, Benazir Bhutto, because they used to give those arms and they're like, they managed to survive on the road over here. And I finish with this particular story. When you say to the Bosnians, let's go to Banja Luka, Bosnians are like, Sammy, brother, we don't talk about Bruno. We don't go to Banja. Banja Luka was the Muslim population in 91 was 48%. Today it's less than 2%. When they entered it, when the war started, they literally drove out thousands of Muslims out of their homes. And all of the 18 masajid that had been there since 1500s, they threw Gwaliki with it. Then they turned them into garbage dumps. Then when the smell got bad, they turned them into parking lots. And they threw the materials into the river. After 1995, there was supposed to be a Rajab repair, but Aries didn't let the Bosnians return. In 2001, the graduates of the Ghazi Huzur Bey Waqaf, which has been there since 1532, just so you're aware about the Ghazi Bey Waqaf, you know what it says? It's a good fish, Quran, Hadith, and any science relevant to the modern age. That Waqaf has never been shut down, ever. Even when they shut down 95% of the Waqaf, they never shut down the Ghazi Huzur Bey Waqaf. Do you know what they tried to do instead? They went to the Waqaf and they said, listen, your recitation is lovely. Why don't you teach Quran and Hadith, but don't teach any modern science? Like create imams, but don't create people who are anyway. The graduates of this madrasa one day had scholarships to study in Germany, America, and Austria. 9 imams were graduates of that madrasa. The story goes, they sat in a circle and they cried about the state of Banja Luka. Then one 21-year-old, they were only on like 21, 22, 23. They all said, you know what, listen, we keep crying about the state of the Ummah. Let's go and try and do something about it. So they go to Banja Luka. They rent a hotel room. They try to buy 18 parking lots. Their door is kicked down in the nighttime and they're beaten up, broken ribs, black eyes. They're kicked out of the city. When they come back to Sarajevo, one young student says to them, guys, why don't we go to UNESCO and ask UNESCO what we need, to help us build it. UNESCO said, sorry guys, I'd love to help you, but you need 68% original materials. So they went back to Banja Luka and they bought 18 parking lots, fundraising through local Bosnians. They dived in the river, they went and they pulled out pillars and materials and the like. They found the original plans in Turkey, and in 2001, they began the reconstruction of the Messenger. Last year, they finished the 18th masjid. When you see, not only did they survive, you were mentioned, Sheikh, that some people abandon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I went and I asked the imams there. I said, listen, with the greatest of respect, why are you? Like, you guys aren't rich. Like, you could have had such a better life. Like, who on earth wakes up in the morning and says, you know what? I'm going to go to the heartland of where the fascist ideology emerged in order to rebuild the masajid. And wallahi, the imam looks at me bluntly and goes, I don't understand the question. They said, we're going to erase Islam. How can a Muslim live believing they succeeded in it? He goes, we couldn't tolerate it. We didn't take it. He goes, we went and rebuilt it there. Zvornik, which was 40 minutes away from Srebrenica. I know time was a bit tight. I know these places aren't usually on the traditional route, but I'm hoping the other companies start to add it. Zvornik, there was a masjid there. It was actually carrying the whole city. The Muslim families went back to those areas and they rebuilt the masjid on the border with Serbia, 5 minutes away from the restaurant where the genociders had planned the ethnic cleansing. And when you pray in the masjid and you come out, the hill of Serbia is right opposite you. The Muslims went back, they rebuilt. The Palestinians went home, the Bosnians went home. The Banja Luka and these others, they were all rebuilt. And that's the story of Bosnia. In that sometimes, in that tragedy, in that calamity, you'll never find a Bosnian who says, I regret the war. Instead, what they tell you is the war shook us. And yes, we gave a lot of shuhada for it. But as a result, we're going back and we're rebuilding and we keep going and we keep pushing, which is why I think Bosnia is as closest parallel to Gaza today. And I finish with the words of a doctor who came from Gaza. You might know him. It's a guy called Ahmed Yusuf. He gives a lot of press conferences in America. He's from New Jersey, based in Arkansas. And he came here last year in August. And he said, Sami, I want to go to Banja Luka. I want to go see this Banja Luka place. I come, it's 3 hours away. He goes, no, I'll go Fajr, I'll come back to Isha. I told him, I asked Dino. Dino said to me as a boy, he goes, brother Sami, I've heard you story about Banja Luka, but I don't want to go. I said, no, just go, man, whatever. Anyway, he goes. So Dino comes back first, the Bosnian. Dino, how was it? Sami, the Muslim, they walk out with their chest out. No, he goes, they walk like proud. I remember telling the Imam, I told him, how do you live here as a minority? He goes, I'm not minority. Islam belongs here. He goes, we make a lot of noise there. Like Islamic New Year, we set off large fireworks so they know that Islam is here. When we pray Isha, we put our engines on loud so that they know we're coming back from Salat al-Isha. We want to tell them that we're here. But here's the point that he made there. I asked him, what is the reaction of those who committed the genocide to you being here? And this is what he said to me. And this is why, for me, I don't believe in the West, we do real da'wah. He said to me, Sami, when the Serbian is born, they are bathed in hate. But when you give the da'wah, they start to doubt. They're like, wait a minute, I was taught you had 2 horns on your head, and I was taught you were... He goes, I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, wait a minute, you're normal. He goes, so I came to the conclusion, our duty is da'wah. Our duty is to follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where they preach hate, we preach that we can live together. We preach that love. We preach to Allah. But the doctor in Gaza, when he left Banja Luka and he left Bosnia, it was him who said the quote that I keep putting, I love quoting. He said, Sami, I left Gaza convinced it could never be rebuilt. I was convinced that Palestine talk about resilience, but really Palestine is destroyed. But I came to Bosnia, Sami, and I saw Srebrenica, I saw Zvornik, I saw Banja Luka, I saw Sarajevo, I saw the stories, I saw Igman Mountain, I saw the wooden masjid, I saw when I walked through Sarajevo in the old town that all of these places used to have the snipers and the like. I walked, and they're not here anymore. Like they came and they left. That you're walking through a city where the genociders are gone. 30 years later, they're gone. Who knows, maybe 30 years we'll walk through Gaza. In 30 years, we'll walk through Palestine. In 30 years, we could walk Gaza free. In 30 years, that's the story of Bosnia. In that Anna ma'al usri yusra. After hardship, there is ease. You went to Mostar and thought it was just a little town. Mostar was the Hiroshima of the war it was fought. Look how fast the Muslims rebuilt it. Look how rapidly they built the minarets. Look how rapidly they rebuilt the bridge. Look how rapidly they put the adhan back up. Look at the Dhira, how desperate they were for Allahu Akbar to rain from those minarets. Look how much they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though they went through this hardship. That's the story of Bosnia. So the next fool who says that the Ummah is weak, go to them and tell them, I went to a land of Bosnia, abandoned by the entire world, and because they had Allah, they want to gate the entire world.